No one, and I mean no one, thought at the start of the 2005 season. No one, and I mean no one, thought at the start of the 2005 season there was a chance the Sox would win the whole thing. And let's revisit why with my predecessors on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan, a contributor for SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And also follow and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Well, continuing this week's 2005 World Series look back, former hosts of this show, Herb Lawrence and Nick Murawski, joined me to go over how at the beginning of that season, it looked impossible for the team to win the whole thing, plus their memories of that run. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. And let's start off with Herb going over what the general feeling was at the start of the 2005 season.
They had just traded one of their best players away that offseason in Carlos Lee for a punch and Judy hitter and Scott Podsednik. I always said this, if that trade was made in the era of Twitter and social media, that would have been widely panned, where you give away a young hitter I think he was the 4 or 5 WAR player in Carlos Lee, left fielder in his 20s, for a guy who's, stole 70 bases for the Milwaukee Brewers, but really was, as I said, a punch and Judy hitter, top of the order guy, and Luis Vizcaino. It was very troubling for me initially because I love Carlos Lee, but I understood why they wanted to get rid of him because he was a me first player, and Ozzie did not want that. As I think I told on this very same Locked On White Sox, that Jamie Burke play where Torrey Hunter ran him over at the plate in 2004, and then the subsequent game where Carlos Lee didn't take out the second baseman, that signed, sealed, and delivered Carlos Lee's ticket out the side of Chicago, which also signed, sealed, and delivered the White Sox World Series the next year, because I think Scott Podsednik and Luis Vizcaino, for his little part, actually helped the White Sox win the World Series where Carlos Lee would not have.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because I remember when that trade went down, I was actually working for the Brewers radio flagship station. So I knew a lot about Scott Podsednik and being that he was coming off, and I was working in the Miller Park scoreboard. So I knew that, Scott Podsednik was struggling. He was struggling really bad in 2004 to the point where, he was doing a lot of desperate things to try to get going. And I remember being like, this is the guy that they're going with. They're giving up a prime player. But then I covered Carlos Lee that 2005 season, and it became abundantly clear that, yes, they needed to trade Carlos Lee. I just remember that. He was definitely a me first guy.
Yeah, so, and lots of power, lots of potential. The White Sox have had a bunch of those guys. I mean, before him, Lyle Mouton. After him, Avi Garcia. They're a dime a dozen. Diane Viciato didn't hit the heights that Carlos Lee hit, but same type of player where bat first, not really a good glove guy. And Carlos Lee would be watching the stat sheet after a 10-8 loss, 4 for 5. It was a good day. Nice. And Ozzie wasn't feeling that.
Yeah. Do you also think the team would have won the World Series had they brought back Maglio Ordonez?
Yeah. Let's see. Maglio in 2005 and 6. 2005 probably was a slightly better player than Jermaine Dye at that same point in their careers, as we saw the year after in 2006, Maglio leading the Detroit Tigers to the World Series, even though they lost that. I think in 2004, if Maglio stays healthy and Frank Thomas stay healthy, the White Sox have a really good shot of going to the playoffs and maybe upsetting some people then. But I don't think Jose Contreras was the same player in 2004 that he turned out to be in 2005 and 2006. So I don't know if you're going to get the pitching effort that the White Sox got in the playoffs in 2005. But I think Maglio Ordonez was a beast. And the fact that they moved on from him because they thought his knee was shot and he went out and got some experimental treatment out in, I think, Europe, where he got his knee all together, and the unspoken things about him and his relationship with Alex Rodriguez, I'll stay away from. But I think I love Maglio. He was awesome for the White Sox, and the fact that they replaced him with Jermaine Dye, and Jermaine Dye didn't really skip a beat, excellent.
So the one thing that I wanted to get to, and you brought it up with, maybe getting more, more guys that were more team oriented. It does seem like that off season was very underrated because they did get a lot of guys that like really liked being around each other, that were grinders, that were willing to embrace what Ozzie wanted to do. Just how underrated was that off season?
Just if you look at the names from 2004 offseason from December until the early February, you're like, ugh. I mean, Jermaine Dye signs, Dustin Hermanson signs. You go and get, I think Bobby Jenks is on the the scrap heap. They get him. Other players on the team. The trade for Carlos Lee to Milwaukee to getting Scott Podsednik, huge. Like, and Tadahito Gucci in that offseason, like that was the White Sox first Japanese player. And yeah, he looked good in Japan, but at that time, like Ichiro was like the standard, and then everybody else fell by the wayside. So we didn't really know what we're getting in Tadahito Gucci. So that offseason, I was like, I don't know what Kenny's out here doing. He's just trying to get people on their second legs. Like, we had already seen Jermaine Dye in Atlanta and Kansas City and in Oakland. Good player, solid player. But I was like, this is a typical White Sox move to see if this guy has a second act in his career. I wasn't really expecting anything from him. Hermanson, more the same, but he came in huge. Him and Shingo Takatu early in the year, where they were the closers of the White Sox. So it was very underrated that they had that Kenny Williams and his staff had that offseason. Just coming up aces with everybody that they did sign. I mean, I think in that same offseason, they got Cliff Polite, who had his best year by far, not even close. Like, Cliff Polite's year in 2005 is the outlier. Same thing with Neil Kotz. They are both sub-2 ERA guys. And for Kenny Williams and their staff to put that together, that type of offseason and everything just to hit, it's, as people say, it might be flukish, it might be luck, but you got to give him credit for what he did. No other general manager in White Sox history has done what Kenny Williams did, because I don't even think they had general managers back in 17 or 06.
Yeah, and also what was the main thing that it was surprising was he actually was shipping talent out, like Carlos Lee, and he was letting superstar players go like Maglio Ordonez. And then the even bigger thing that I thought was he was willing to make, granted everybody's talked about maybe it wasn't Paul Konerko was the official leader, but Paul Konerko, that was basically his team, because at that point, Frank Thomas, they were just getting tired of him always being hurt.
Mm-hmm.
However, he does have that little stretch where he goes, he's there, he's hitting home runs, and he's kind of keeping the team afloat. I mean, how, underrated is that little stretch that he had to keep them, going before he gets hurt?
I think he had 130 at bats that year and hit 12 home runs. He was crushing that ball. Didn't hit high for average, didn't get on base like a regular, typical Frank Thomas year. I think he was his late 30s at that time as a White Sox. So, it was the transition. Like, it was Paulie Konerko's team. And I forgot to mention the offseason, Kenny Williams also brought in AJ Brzezinski from San Francisco. So that was a great signing there. But Frank was integral in his 12 home runs he hit that year. It was just pitch the ball to Frank, he's going to hit it over the fence. And then he just couldn't sustain. He couldn't get over the injuries that he had. Like I said, his body was 37. Him and Kenny were always at odds. And that next offseason produced the famous quote of, "He better stay out of White Sox business." And so, which I still to this day think is the most audacious thing anybody's ever said, that a general manager says to probably the best player in White Sox history that he needs to stay out of White Sox business. That was weird. That was a strange energy. But yeah, I couldn't believe that Frank Thomas did all that he did that year, and the White Sox got him his World Series that he wanted. I know that he didn't play in any of the playoff games. It wasn't any on those rosters, but he's just as big as part of this White Sox winning the 2005 World Series as any of them.
All right, let's switch over to what Nick thought about the team at the start of the 2005 season and some of his memories after the break on Locked On White Sox. Hey, we've all been there, logging on early, waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. And that's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting sports and concert tickets fast and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to game time or showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. Game Time has last-minute tickets and zone deals for big savings, like 10% off exclusive zone deals for the upcoming Cubs versus Red Sox games on July 20th. And hey, it might be the rival Cubs, but you can hate watch the crosstown rival while also supporting the team that set the White Sox so much in the Garrett Crochet trade. Take the guesswork out of buying sports, concert, and theater tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app and create an account and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms. So make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. All right, so Nick, I just got to ask. 2005 season starts. Did you think that the White Sox had any chance in heck that they were going to win the World Series?
No, and I don't think anybody did. I was kind of intrigued by the moves they made in the offseason, but it was painful to see Magli Ordonez leave and Carlos Lee. I mean, there was so much thunder that left, and to hear that we were just getting this, speedster, Scott Podsednik, like who is this guy? Gucci. I mean, we were told he was a heralded player that coveted by a lot of teams, and we were able to land him. Jermaine Dye, it's like, okay, I've heard of this guy, but isn't he a little bit past his prime? AJ Przinsky, I remember hating him for years when he was with the Twins. So it was really a motley crew. But I liked what I saw from Ozzie in 2004, and, it's just looking to just have some fun, another season with hopefully they can hang around like they did in 2004. They were above 500, and absolutely not. I did not have World Series aspirations as a fan.
And like in today's baseball, it's very rare that an actual team is built for a manager. And sometimes if it is, it's built very badly like we saw last season. But you think about that, 20 years ago, they did build that team for Ozzie, and then they went and won the World Series. I mean, that would be almost a rarity these days.
Yeah, a lot of clubs have tried to do it, and not just in baseball. You've seen it in basketball and in football where teams have tried to buy a championship. They go out and they get all of the talent they possibly can. Sure, it's happened from time to time. You've seen some of those Yankees teams, and, they just the Boston Celtics. I mean, you acquire so much talent, you build that championship caliber team. That, of course, wasn't the way it was going, but to your point, it fit Ozzie's style. Now, I didn't see the pitching the way it was going to go. I mean, that I don't even think Ozzie saw that. And for a team to have three different closers, from Shingo to Hermanson, then to Bobby Jenks, that usually doesn't happen for a club that's going to go all the way, wire to wire, and eventually win the World Series. So it was a solid bullpen. Guys stepped up, and the arms in that rotation, they're going to – you'll be talking about the feats, and they're going to celebrate, what they did in the ALCS. But Ozzie Ball, that term came from that, the way they kind of played, get him on, move him over, and then get him in. And before you knew it, you're watching the game. You might not have been paying attention if you're out at a bar or whatever with friends. You look up and it's like, they're already winning. It's 1-0, 2-0. I felt like they had a streak going where they just had the lead in every single game. If you missed the first couple innings, you'd be floored if they were losing when you finally caught up to speed. So, yeah, it was something that it doesn't seem to be the way of baseball, but it was just the perfect situation for that time, for that manager, for those players, for those personalities. It all just worked.
Yeah, and I don't have the run differential on me right now, but the thing about it too is that team was almost built to win very tight games. As you said, it seemed like they were always ahead, but it seemed like they were only up, like you said, 2-0, and that's all they needed. They only needed like 2 or 3 runs, and then the pitching would just take over. I don't know if we'll ever see a team win a championship like that with such margins where they just didn't score a ton. They scored enough, but it wasn't like they scored a ton, where now it's like you got to try to win. You want to try to have the biggest positive run differential possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And take a look at some of those players on that lineup and that roster that were like black line players, meaning they were leading the league, in whatever category. I'm sure Podsednik was up there with stolen bases. Konerko had the power going in that stretch at that time. Now, Frank Thomas, started the year. Frank Thomas played a handful of games, more than I think we sometimes remember in 05. And he was probably the only superstar, maybe, coming out of camp with that team. They didn't have these household names. They didn't have a bunch of starting all-stars. So that's the other kind of head scratcher, is they picked each other up. They came up big in certain situations, like Joe Creedy being clutch, Aaron Rowan being clutch when they had to, the defense. And like you said, we got some second or third lives out of Contreras and out of El Duque. And it felt like everybody just fed off of each other.
And I like that you brought up El Duque, because I remember at the beginning of the century, or that decade, it seemed like the White Sox were constantly looking for that fifth starter, because one of the biggest things that was dragging them down, I think one of the reasons why, just of all the things on the margins, was they just couldn't have that really good fifth starter. And it seemed like that fifth starter then always went up against like the Twins or the Indians, whoever they were chasing at that time. And they finally get El Duque, and he actually comes through and he provides being a good fifth starter, and then obviously does what he does out of the bullpen. But it was like, it almost seemed like, man, he was one of those missing pieces to finally put them over the top.
Yeah, he will be forever an absolute legend for what he did against the Boston Red Sox. I remember where I was in Orland Park at a Buffalo Wild Wings off of LaGrange Road with a very good friend of mine. And everybody, it's standing room only. Everybody is just in pins and needles. And what he managed to do to the Red Sox, it was, again, you're just going to continue to tell new generations of Sox fans about it. He will live on and on and on. But, how about Freddie Garcia? That was a trade that was made the year before. And I was kind of upset at the time when that trade was made, because I really liked Miguel Olivo. Like he had a good arm. I was like, finally, we've got a solid backstop here, a young guy that we can kind of move forward with. But boy, was that the right move. We got Freddie Garcia. We locked him up. We extended him, and he was such a workhorse. Sweaty Freddie. There's a lot of different players that you can pick out and say, oh, well, without that guy, we don't win, or without that guy, we don't win. I just think it was just that puzzle. Like everybody fit together, and everyone made each other better. It was, it wasn't supposed to maybe happen that way. It just worked out that way. It was almost an accidental or a mistake, but maybe that's why they get forgotten sometimes, because we weren't a team that just threw a bunch of money at a bunch of superstars, and we just kind of were guys that got second chances and made their opportunities really work for the most part.
A quick timeout for those listening on Apple or Spotify, but I want to share Nick going over how cautious he was feeling about the Sox run and why Herb doesn't think the White Sox will win the World Series in the next 20 years. And that's next on Locked On White Sox. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And think about it. You don't got time to waste going through an automated system. You got to get the job done right, and you need to get the right part. So Supply House wants to make sure you're taken care of. And for the trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of skilled professionals already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. And I've been telling my brother-in-law, in the plumbing business, convince your company, use Supply House. It's got all these advantages and great customer service. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, wherever they get their podcasts. This show is available on all major podcast platforms. Being you were in Orland Park, you're in the area. I've talked to people that were out of the area following the team. What was it like to follow the team within the area of Chicago?
Well, I think I remember being very cautious that this is going to come crumbling down. You know, I think that was just my mentality, maybe as a Sox fan, that eventually the bubble's going to burst, the dream's going to be over, and they're going to come back down to earth. But as the summer continued, you know, and the Sox were like 10 games over, then there were 20 games over, and there were 30, and ESPN was still at that point was really a sports juggernaut. Like, that's how we all got our information, and everybody was watching SportsCenter still at the time. And this was well before social media, and they were getting coverage, you know, they were getting written up. There were national articles. But I think a lot of us were like, don't talk about the Sox, keep us under the radar. But it was really exciting, you know, being in the southwest suburbs and going around and just seeing all the Sox hats and jerseys. The games were electric. The games were a ton of fun. They were must-see TV. You know, I would watch a lot of games with my family, but I also was always out, you know, when I could, with buddies after work, you know, catching the game at a bar, restaurant, wherever, at somebody's house. It was always on. You just had to know what was happening. And if they lost, I'm not saying it was, you know, like the Bulls 72-10 season. I'm not saying that, where it was like, oh my God, the Bulls lost. But when the Sox lost during that time, up until that crazy Cleveland stretch where Cleveland was just, you know, Sox were in a funk, Cleveland was coming on hot. Most of the summer, it was like, of course the Sox won. They're just, it's just magical. And you tried to get to the ballpark as much as you could. And you know, Sox fans were just in such a good mood, and we enjoyed getting to know the players and the characters, and you could see the fun that they were having, and we were having it just as much watching them. It just brings such a smile thinking back now. I can't believe 20 years ago, but yeah, that was a summer of baseball. I just remember watching so much baseball, going to so many games. Like, I did not want to miss a Sox game. And when the All-Star break came around and they were off for like 4 or 5 days, that was pain, because there was no White Sox baseball. You know, you were like, what are we going to do tonight? You know, what are we going to watch? What's going to, like, there's no Sox. You kind of, you didn't know what to do with yourself, because that was automatic, you know, 7:10 or whenever the starts were, Sox game is on.
All right. Did you make any big Sox purchases? Because I remember in 2005, I'm actually wearing it right now. I purchased my first jersey. It's my Mark Burley jersey. Now, granted, it was a replica, but that was all I could afford. But I still remember it was a lot. Did you go out and buy a jersey? Did you go out and do something crazy on that?
I think a lot of the merchandise, a lot of the money I spent, I did go to a playoff game. I went to game 1 of the ALDS against Boston, where the Sox just absolutely thumped them. I mean, it was electric. When Nancy played "Na Na Hey Hey Goodbye," was it Matt Clement that got bounced perhaps? But you just felt just this hum, this collective bouncing. You just thought there is no roof on the stadium, but you just thought it was going to explode, like just things were going to crumble because of the deafening noise from what Sox fans were experiencing. So I bought a playoff ticket, but it was when they won the World Series, Todd. Like, I needed every sweatshirt, every pint glass. I needed, if there was a Frisbee, I have a pizza cutter, a bottle opener, pennants, like anything that had World Series on it, needed it, had to have it.
Yeah, I remember my mom wanted a World Series ornament. That's
Sure.
what she wanted for Christmas. She's like, "Can you give me a White Sox World Series ornament?" I still think she hangs it on the tree. I want to just quickly go back to when you were saying like sort of that nervous happy, because I feel like it was like a lot of nervous happy energy with the White Sox. And the one thing that I'm very proud of White Sox fans, it seems like I'm not the only one, and I prided myself at least, was being very nervous and very, very humble and being like, I do not want to insult the baseball gods. Where I remember 2 years before, Chicago Cubs fans, oh, it's in the bag. I remember that game 6 and game 7. It's in the bag. We got Wood and Pryor going. We're going to win. We're going to the World Series. And then it all fell apart. I just had so much joy in that, knowing that, hey, if you're humble, your curse can end.
Yeah. Yeah. I had some coworkers that I don't know if they were Cub fans. They weren't Sox fans. And when I would show up in my Sox jacket in, September, and we were going through that really difficult stretch, and Cleveland was right on our heels, and I was still showing up, still watching the games, of course, in my Sox gear. And I just would hear it from coworkers like, it's going to happen. You guys are going to choke. They would sometimes tell me how many games back Cleveland was. Like, they knew. And I think it was playful, but there was a part of like anti-Sox fans just that, kind of wanted to almost see this collapse. They weren't a fan of the club, and I think maybe in awe of if you guys were so far up. And look at what's happening, and I think that's where a lot of people would go to, like, we just can't have good things, or we're cursed or something. But that is also the way of a baseball season. There's going to be turbulence. And I think that stretch, the Sox overcoming that stretch, hanging on, and that made them stronger. That galvanized them, for their historic playoff run. So I was, I didn't want a lot of media, and I didn't want the Sox to get overhyped. I loved hearing about the Sox that were getting attention. I loved hearing all the good things, but I knew the good things because I was watching, right? Like, I saw it with my own eyes. I don't need anybody else to tell me. Let's just, kind of fly under the radar, keep doing our thing, and surprise some people. And I think that's kind of what maybe the Sox did. Ultimately, is we caught a lot of people off guard.
Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And I'll be back tomorrow with more of this 2005 World Series look back. Feel free to share your memories of the 2005 World Series at the episode page on YouTube. X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub, or at Locked On Sox. Or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow.